Welcome back, everyone, to our final session of Voices 2020. I'm your host, Imran Ahmed, founder and CEO of the Business of Fashion. This is always about the time when I get a little sad as Voices is in the home stretch, but it's also my favorite session each year because it's about humanity and resilience and self-care, something that we all sorely need more of in the world, especially at a time like this. So every year at Voices, we conclude with a session focused on how to be the healthiest, best versions of ourselves. And this session took on additional importance this year because our collective health and our individual health have been front of mind ever since the coronavirus became part of our daily lives. So in our final session, it's important to go back to some of the themes we began with in session 1 on the wider world and talk about living with the virus. Back in February, Milan Fashion Week was running as normal. By then, we'd heard about a novel virus that came from Wuhan and understood that a large region in China had to be shut down to contain the disease. But for many of us, myself included, it hadn't really registered that the virus was well and truly coming for us here in Europe and in North America and all over the world. And then Lombardy, just outside Milan, one of the world's most important fashion capitals, and Veneto, where the Italian fashion giant OTB is based, were suddenly locked down. So-called red zones were established, impacting 50,000 people right in the middle of Milan Fashion Week. Who knew that within a few weeks, entire continents would be shut down, with citizens confined to their homes? Milan Fashion Week was when the word lockdown actually first entered our lexicon. And after that, Fashion Week started to feel a little spooky. Giorgio Armani staged his fashion show without an audience, unknowingly setting a trend for many others that would come later in the year. But most other fashion shows went ahead as planned, a few of them with social distancing measures in place. I wonder now, would we have attended those fashion shows crowded onto small benches and enclosed spaces for hours on end if we knew then what we know now about the coronavirus? At the time, no one had the benefit of the hindsight we have now. And shortly after returning from Paris Fashion Week in March, Sofia Neophytou Apostolou, the editor-in-chief of 10 magazine, came down with COVID-19. And Sofia kindly agreed to join us here at the Voices studio in London to talk to our editor-at-large, Tim Blanks, about the incredible personal journey she's been on this year. So please join me in welcoming Sofia and Tim, who I have to say, it's a real pleasure to see for the first time in person since those days back in March in Paris. So over to you now, Sofia and Tim.
Thank you, Imran. It's true, remembering back to those days in Milan, just before we headed out to Paris, there was a tinge of panic. But there was even talk about whether the shows in Paris would go ahead. They did. The show must go on, of course. But this is where Sofia's journey begins. And I came back from Paris on March the 3rd. Now, there was a big party in Paris that night. And if you want to point your finger at a super spreading event, I mean, maybe you could point there. But Sofia, I wonder if you had any sense of the moment where you might have crossed paths with COVID-19.
I honestly can't pinpoint a certain specific moment. I think what you do retrospectively is think about the amount of bodies pressed against one another, going into the show, coming out of the show. We literally have, a 12-inch space to sit in next to each other, maybe even less sometimes. We're given such a tiny space. And the idea that we didn't really take it seriously, I think Imran said at the beginning, when Armani announced that he was going to cancel his show, we were like flabbergasted, like, how can he do that? What does it mean? Is this real? We just didn't absorb the danger. And that's not to say we were foolish, but we just didn't have enough information. And I think we were just foolhardy in how we approached what we were doing. So we got on the planes, we sat and had dinners together. We actually had a party in Paris celebrating 20 years of the magazine. all of us there sweating in a room like an old school party. You know, it didn't occur to us. So no, I just had no idea that it would escalate. And honestly, I was one of the ones that was, oh, this isn't that bad. A friend of mine told me that I sent her a text when I first started getting my flu-y symptoms, and I said to her, oh, I've got these flu-y symptoms, but I'll be fine in 5 days. She didn't hear from me again till June. I sent that message to her in March the 12th. So that's the scale of how ridiculous I feel now about what happened then, you know. Just didn't take it seriously.
But, you know, at that time, by the time we came back from Paris, it was the change, the global change was already underway. It seemed like it struck the British fashion industry, the attendees at the shows, particularly strongly. I mean, when I still talk to people who say, well, I don't know anybody who's had this thing. And that's why there's this, you know, you still meet skeptics. And I could think of 10 people who'd been at the shows, that I'd been with them. Why do you think it hit you so hard?
Personally, for me, I mean, I know a lot of my friends in the industry did get the virus, but we all got it at different stages. And I mean, what they told me was that my viral load was so high that I was energy-wise very depleted. I'd gone straight from Milan to Paris, back home for my godmother's 80th birthday. So I've been traveling back and forth, not very much sleep, because our lives, as you know, in that show season isn't just the shows, it's the dinners, the breakfasts, the constant interaction with people. And also we are quite physical when we see one another. Even if we see each other every day, we kiss hello, we kiss goodbye. There isn't that distancing that maybe a lot of other industries actually have. We do have a very social interaction at the shows. And so I feel like we all became super spreaders. We just did. I mean, my approach to things now is so very different. I'm much more conscious of how close I get to people. Are they wearing masks? Have they been tested? Even to come here today for me was a big, as I've said to you, I haven't been in a room with this many people since March.
And there aren't many.
And there aren't many people in this room. And the reason I'm here is because Imran was so specific about how COVID safe it was, and that's my big priority now. How COVID safe is everyone? Have you been tested? When were you tested? Because it's not a joke, it's not.
But how did it manifest? You say you were having flu-y symptoms. It manifested itself as that, but a few days after you left Paris.
Yeah, I mean,
you had a pretty
2
long
weeks.
incubation.
2 weeks, 2 weeks. It was 2 weeks. But what happens is, you know, when we get back from the shows, we're so tired. We call it fashion flu. We get this flu where we do want a duvet day, where we do want to just try and recharge our batteries because we are so tired, and we've worked really hard for a month. You know, if you go to New York and you've travelled, and I do menswear and couture, so you're constantly on this treadmill of travel and airports and aeroplanes. Now I think of all these places as huge germ-filled
Petri dishes.
Yeah, Petri dishes. I do. That's what I think of them as, because every time you touch your phone, you've touched another surface, it's gone through an airport. You know, that whole idea of I can't fly till next May because my lungs are so damaged from the illness, but even the idea of going to an airport fills me with fear, just because of all the, you know, the possible places the virus can get you in a way.
But when you first started feeling ill,
Yeah.
how long after that was the progression to
Being put into hospital.
Yes, yeah.
So I started feeling ill about a week and a half after I got back, and I just thought it was fashion flu. So I started taking my day nurse, night nurse combo that I tend to take, and then it just wouldn't get better. And I think, yeah, it was on the 18th of March that my husband was like, right, we're going to call an ambulance, you're not breathing. properly, and I was in the ambulance outside the house for 40 minutes actually it was, and they were like, we've got to take you into hospital. So yeah, it was a week and a half after I got back.
And then you were ventilated.
And then I was ventilated because I think at the time that's the only solution they had for the illness. Retrospectively, do I believe that was the best solution? Not really, because the damage that all causes is just so huge. You're lying still for a month. More people die on a ventilator than survive. The odds are 70-30. So I think now less people are being put on ventilators, more are given a combination of oxygen, antibiotics, steroids. But I think at the time it was the only solution available. So there's no blame to be, given to anyone. It was just, how can we make them breathe? The only way we can get oxygen inside them quickly is by ventilating.
It's interesting, when we were talking about your experience, and you said you woke up after a month in a reduced coma and the world had changed.
Yeah.
People's vocabularies had changed.
Yeah.
And I said, it sounds like The Walking Dead.
Yes. And for me, when I woke, I was convinced it was the next day. Totally convinced. So I was, is it Saturday? Because I'd gone in on a Friday. They were like, no, it's April the 18th. I was like, what? And they haven't got time because they're obviously dealing with lots of people that are really barely surviving all around you, like in different wards, in different rooms, And the nurses were, well, we had to put you in an induced coma. And I don't understand. They were like, you've been in a coma for a month. And then I was, well, where's my family? And they were saying, well, we're in lockdown. And don't forget, I'd gone into this month of sleep before lockdown happened. Lockdown happened on the 23rd, I think, and I was in my coma from the 18th. So I just didn't understand what that meant. What does lockdown mean? They were like, well, all the pubs are closed. These were it was, and I was like, yeah, but where's my family? They were like, no, you don't understand. Nobody is allowed to visit. People have to queue to buy food. People are bulk buying toilet paper. And my mind was just racing. How is this possible? And it was the land of the living dead. It just felt like that, like apocalyptic.
I think something that comes through very, very strongly about your story is your family.
Yeah.
And this is the most tragic element of the pandemic. One of the most tragic elements has been the isolation of people who are ill. But in your case, because you were seriously ill and then you had an extremely long recovery in which your family was totally instrumental.
I mean, without my family, I honestly don't believe I could have come through at all. It was so hard when I woke up because I couldn't move and I didn't understand why. There were lots of questions, and I was very insistent about FaceTiming anyone, so they had to try and get me to communicate that way. But without them, I just don't know how I would have done. My mother-in-law used to cook me my favourite soup. My sister, every day, different meals, every opportunity. My brother, my mum, my husband, everybody gave so much love, but
none of them ever.
Well, we don't know because I don't think we all understood. I think my son did have it because he was in Milan with me, but we sent him home early, so maybe he did have it. My husband had flu symptoms, but we weren't sure. But apart from that, no. And I don't know if, when I was taken into hospital, they said that my lung capacity was only at 20%. So they had no option but to ventilate. But, I think since they've realised it was an inflammatory disease, and if there had been the option of giving anti-inflammatories, it would have helped with all the symptoms that I then had, like the lack of breathing. I mean, the reality now is I'm tachycardic. You do suffer quite badly with fatigue. The fatigue is something I've never had that. You know, I've always been an incredibly, incredibly energetic person. And now I have to be very, like, store my energy, use it when I need to, make sure I daytime nap even. I've never done that, you know, daytime nap, you know, but, you know, and mentally it takes you on a journey that I can't even begin to understand, or, you know, so when people say, oh, you're back to normal, outwardly, maybe, outwardly.
You mentioned something extraordinary. You mentioned survivor's guilt.
Yeah.
Really, after the experience you've had, that's like a. I know it's a reaction. I know it's a common reaction, but still, why?
I don't know. I think, look, a lot of the things that happened to you. I mean, when I woke from the coma and I was in, you know, ICU, the nurses were like, this is something that happens to people that have survived a terminal illness. It's something that you have to deal with mentally through help with, you know, seeing the right people. I think that's what needs to happen. The information needs to be liberated for all of us, because it's not just a physical assault on your body, it's a mental assault as well. And you do, you know, I looked at these amazing people in my hospital, the nurses, the doctors, all the people risking their lives every day. And the reality of them asking, oh, what do you do for a living? And I felt guilty. I did feel terrible, you know. I'm in fashion. I felt so, was I doing enough? Should I do more? How will I change my approach to what I do? You know, and that did, it was a big wake-up call, it really was.
And now you're evangelical.
I mean, I sort of, yeah, I am. In a way, for me, I feel like we have to, all of us, contribute to things to change them. I mean, my healing processes have been multi-layered. You know, I have seen psychologists and physiotherapists, but also Western medicine cannot offer me everything I need. And so I have seen a herbalist. I mean, I'm married to an acupuncturist, so I have acupuncture weekly. So those things in the end are the things that really have helped me. But mentally, I force myself to do things that, you know, are just approach life in a very different way. Every moment's become precious. And that sounds so cliched, but it does, because our lives are so, the speed at which we live our lives in this industry is so fast that sometimes we blink and we miss it. We just do. That's the truth. I have become a much more obsessed with nature, with taking time, spending time with people I care about, you know, COVID allowing. But, you know, that's definitely what it's taught me.
I think you're going to have a lot to teach everyone that you've worked with all these years. But thank you very much.
You're so welcome.
Wonderful to see you.
You're so welcome.
I'm so grateful that we can do this.
Well, hopefully we can do more. Yeah.
I hope so.
Yeah.
Over to you, Imran.
Thank you, Sophia and Tim. I mean, it's really harrowing to hear stories like that. But, you know, there's a lot of stories like that that are around the world now. People who've, you know, still got the disease. They've got long COVID. They have extended symptoms. And you know, I want you to stay with us now, because we're going to meet Sarah Jones, an expert on the largest continuous COVID health behavior study in the world, to talk about how the virus is changing how we all live and work every day. So we'll be right after that. We'll be back right after this. Welcome back. As we just heard from Sophia, coronavirus is a real menace. In fact, many of us are living in fear of it. In our BOF community exit poll, 26% of you shared that you believe you will get COVID-19 in the future. And that's mean that COVID-19 has quite literally changed the way we live our lives every day. Over the past few months, I've been talking about this topic a lot with my friend Sarah Jones, co-creator of a really topical website whose research on human behavior amid the pandemic informed some of the questions we all asked you about in our exit poll on your attitudes and beliefs about coronavirus. COVIDDataHub.com is the largest continuous COVID health behavior study in the world, with real-time, open access data. Sarah is currently a PhD student at the Institute of Global Health Innovation at Imperial College London. And on top of all that, Sarah has also been providing mental health training to the BOF team during the pandemic. She's been a constant source of support and guidance as we've tried to manage the impact of the pandemic the best we can as a business, as a team, and as individuals. And I invited Sarah to chat about some of the data she's been collecting these past few months so we can understand what we've learned about how COVID-19 is changing human behavior, how this varies around the world, and how our BOF community data compares. Sarah, it's lovely to have you here in the Voices studio here in London.
Thank you. Thank you so much. It's a pleasure to be here. I conduct my doctoral research at Imperial College London, and I've created and am trialing Mental Health Intelligence, a corporate mental health training program. In March, I called on data company YouGov to help me reach out to almost 500,000 people in 29 countries. The result has become the largest ongoing COVID health behavior study of its kind in the world. The data and observation platform that my colleagues and I have created provides long-term, cross-country key indicator trends on how people are behaving in reaction to COVID. The platform has been used by the IMF, the World Health Organization, the OECD, the European Central Bank, the Bank of England, the Cabinet Office, Oxford University, and many others. We've made the data and the results open access at COVIDDataHub.com and the Imperial College London website. We track many COVID-related health behaviors: hand washing, mask wearing, vaccine attitudes, and whether or not we self-isolate when we have symptoms. We also track economic activity, like avoiding shops, working outside the home, and public transit. I also track global anxiety and depression symptoms. I've been privileged to travel quite a bit in my old normal life, mostly to see friends and family in North America. The last time I traveled outside this country was Paris Fashion Week in February. I'm one of those people who goes to Fashion Week, not for the clothes and the trends, but for the chat, to feel the energy and the creativity of the fashion world, and most of all, to smile and laugh and commune for a whole weekend with people who were different from me, different from my everyday life. Since the end of February, life has changed drastically for me, for almost everyone on the planet. And there are very few times, very few moments in our lives when the entire planet is experiencing the same event at the same time, having all the same feelings, the same emotions at the same time. The World Cup, a royal wedding, a man on the moon, these events bring the planet together because they capture our common interests, our common energy. They make us feel the same thing at the same time. Coronavirus has captured the planet's attention and our lives for almost a year now. And while some good news about vaccines is beginning to emerge, we still have a long way to go before the new normal starts. One question kept coming up for me when the world outside China began to wake up last winter to the dangers of coronavirus. Are the citizens of planet Earth all experiencing the same thing at the same time? The data my colleagues and I have collected over the past year suggests that as a planet, we do not, in fact, perceive or behave as though we are experiencing the same thing at the same time. Here's a snapshot of data which represents people's hygiene and social behavior from countries around the world. Activities like washing hands, mask wearing, avoiding public transit. Epidemiologists and policymakers believe that some of these activities will contribute to virus spread, and thus many of them have been regulated, like socializing with more than a few people at a time. Across the world, there seems more of a consensus about some health behaviors more than others. Most countries are no longer always avoiding putting their kids in school, although Brazil, Indonesia, Saudi were outliers. In most countries, people were no longer always avoiding going to shops or always going out in general. However, there has been less planetary consensus on social distancing, with meeting in groups markedly no longer being avoided in East Asia, likewise with avoiding crowded areas and avoiding public transport like buses and subways. And some preventative health behaviors have been divisive. Mask wearing, recommended by the WHO, where social distancing can't be maintained, has actually become a flashpoint in some countries. But we have seen some strong national differences, as you can see in that purple streak down the middle. Nordic countries, Denmark, Finland, Norway, have very few people who report always wearing a mask, while people in Spain, Singapore, Brazil, and most other countries report a very high percentage of people who always wear a mask. As the pandemic has unfolded, it's become clear to me that across the world, we're in fact not experiencing the same thing at the same time. We're not experiencing the same facts, the same death rates, the same cues from one another. And crucially, we're not experiencing the same restrictions. This is evident in observing people's willingness to wear masks. In the Asia-Pacific region, for example, more people are willing to wear a mask, and for more reasons: government advice, social norms, law. In Europe, however, more people may rely on law to guide and nudge them. But how effective can the law be when a country is frustrated with its government? We've observed that the US, the UK, and Brazil have the highest percentage of people who rate their government as handling the pandemic very badly. And with the notable exception of Japan, many countries in the Asia-Pacific region have the lowest percentage of people who rate their government as handling the pandemic very badly. How have these restrictions and our national differences played out with respect to our social lives? Are we all experiencing the same thing at the same time? Well, the data would suggest that we are increasingly diverging, with countries in Asia starting to meet up again, while restrictions on Europe's socializing is demolishing our immediate social bonds to one another once again this fall. Now, what has that done to our mental health? Well, from April to November across 29 countries, depression and anxiety are high and do not seem to have been abated. It's becoming clear that average young people are at higher risk than the average older person. Now, these figures don't include people living in care homes and in hospitals. For that reason, they're likely to undercount the severe effects in these groups. But what does the planet do to look after its mental health? Well, not enough is the straight answer. 1 in 4 people reported they do nothing to look after their mental health. In September, the most popular activity was exercising, with about 1/3 of people reporting low-intensity exercise, like walking. This is somewhat encouraging, because even short bursts of brisk activity can improve mood and energy. About 1 in 4 people are reading up on tips to improve their mental health. And perhaps most encouraging to me is that about 1 in 4 reported doing something for others as a way of improving their mental health, giving time, energy to others, like a neighbor or a friend. Only 1 in 5 reported talking to someone about their mental health. And from UK research, we know that 80% of people who talk about their mental health find it helpful. So personally, I'd like to see that number go up. Now, which countries are talking about their mental health? Again, I've observed some vast national differences in talking about mental health, with more people in Brazil, Vietnam, and the Philippines reporting talking about their mental health than, for example, the Dutch and the Danish. Now, who do we talk to about our mental health? Everyone's experience of poor mental health is different. There is such a complicated convergence of personal and social factors which can lead someone to experience poor mental health. But one thing is clear: our friends and family are the ones we rely on the most, 5 times the frequency of talking to professionals. However, I want to draw your attention to the incredibly important role that work has to play here. Those in work are very clearly talking they're talking about their mental health at work with their colleagues. And companies need to do more to facilitate this and prioritize this, provide better support to their talent. But now I'd like to turn the tables and talk about vaccines. This is the topic on many people's minds. Top scientists on the planet are working hard to deliver a safe vaccine, an effective vaccine to the world. Dr. Noel Brewer is a behavioral scientist and an expert in vaccination and other health behaviors. He is professor of health behavior at the Gilling School of Global Public Health at the University of North Carolina. Dr. Brewer has published over 280 papers on behaviors related to vaccination, vaping warnings, screening tests. He's among the top 1% most cited researchers in the world from the last 3 years. Dr. Brewer has advised the World Health Organization, the U.S. Centers for Disease Control and Prevention, the U.S. President's Cancer Panel under 2 presidents, and the U.S. National Vaccine Advisory Committee. Dr. Brewer and I met when the WHO turned to him and his colleagues to analyze data from my global study about people's vaccine behavior. First off, Noel, congratulations on the addition to your family, and sincerely thank you for joining us today to talk about people's attitudes and about vaccines and how they are shaping our behavior.
So Sarah, are we going to go through some questions? Is that the way to do this?
Is that all right, if you don't mind?
That'd be great.
Wonderful. Now, first off, I want to give full disclosure that I have volunteered for a vaccine trial. I've received one of the 2 doses. It's a personal choice that I made, and I didn't discuss with anyone around me, but yet not even my own family. But I made that choice because I want to be of service to my family, to those around me, to my community. But I recognize that I have access to a lot of scientists, a lot of facts, and I'm in a privileged position as such. My personal confidence in the safety of vaccines in trials is unequivocal. And I wondered, I really want to talk with you today about people's attitudes that give people confidence, and the attitudes also that holds people back from their confidence. I know that your research has suggested that anticipated regret might play a role in whether or not someone gets a vaccine, and I wondered if you could tell us a little bit more about that.
Sure. So how people think about risk affects their behavior, and there's lots of different risk appraisals. One of the risk appraisals is called anticipated regret, the idea that you think about the future and you wonder, what would it be like if I engaged in this behavior if I didn't? So you might regret getting a vaccine, or you might regret not getting a vaccine. So those could be behaviors that you could engage in, the choices of vaccinating or not. And that's one of the leading drivers of vaccination behavior in terms of what people think and feel. But in addition, a big influence is how confident people are in vaccines, the providers of vaccines, the whole vaccination system. And a powerful way to increase vaccine confidence is to have leaders speaking about vaccination in a positive way. So for example, the US now has 3 of our presidents who've said that they would, past presidents who've said that they would speak about the vaccines and specifically get the COVID-19 vaccine on screen, live on television. That's an outstanding action. That's something that all of us can encourage by opening up our address books in contact with the local health authorities and saying, look, I have these connections. I can make these connections to help our media campaign and get some big names on screen and helping them to promote vaccine.
And tell me, what are some of the greatest concerns or the most common concerns that people have about taking vaccines?
They don't want to get hurt. They want it to be safe first and foremost. And as you said, these vaccines are incredibly safe. You're going to get a sore arm. You may feel a little fluey for a day or 2, but that's nothing compared to being hospitalized or possibly exposing a loved one to a disease that could kill them. So these are outstanding vaccines that are safe, but they're also effective, up well above 90%, which puts them in the elite class of vaccines.
And tell me, how important is government trust in vaccines and vaccination programs being adopted by people in a country?
It's extremely important. It's not really exactly what causes people to get vaccinated. But what happens is that having trust in the authorities in the process allows us to establish programs that are effective, allows us to have requirements or reminder and recall systems to get people in for vaccination, or automatically scheduling people for vaccines, or even just the funding of the programs. All of that becomes possible when we have a public that is confident in vaccination.
And I hear a lot in the news these days about worries that there is information overload or information underload, and I'm worried. Do people understand in detail the way that vaccines work, or do they need to? What do you think?
This is a really interesting point. There are sort of two sides to the story. On one side, there's the informed consent people who say we want patients to understand every detail of their medical care and always be giving full informed consent about every last detail. Then there's another side that says our providers, our healthcare providers, are the experts, and we want to be able to rely on them to guide us in a way that is helpful. And we just don't have the headspace to keep track of every last thing and look at every detail. I'm of that camp where I think that nurses and physicians and other healthcare professionals are the experts, and we look to them to help us know what's healthy for us. So that's what I encourage, is that there is a trust relationship with your provider. That person recommends the vaccine, and then you move forward and get it. And then if you have questions, absolutely, that's a time when you can get those answered. You might want to go on the web or find out somewhere else, but honestly, it's that provider that you go to when you have a cough or that you go to when you're not feeling well. That's the person who can help you really understand what's going on and set your mind at ease.
Now, can I ask a sort of basic question? How do virus vaccines work in a population? For example, do a lot of people in a population need to get the vaccine in order for it to work?
Yeah, there's been some nice visualizations of it where there's like a lot of pool balls all bouncing into one another. And you can kind of imagine it that way, where it's not so much what happens to you, although you don't want to get sick. It's that the vaccine doesn't pass through you onto other people. And so there's this idea called herd immunity. And with herd immunity, what you have then is you have these different, I guess that doesn't work. I've got some funny line in here. With herd immunity, what happens is that you stop the vaccine from being passed on from you to another person and from that person to another person. So it breaks this chain of transmission. So it's about protecting you, but also protecting groups of people through that herd immunity process.
Gotcha. And what kind of responsibility do you think that the media plays in the rollout of vaccination programs? Certainly, you've worked on very successful HPV vaccination programs in the past. They probably haven't gotten the global media attention that these upcoming rounds of vaccines will get. What kind of responsibility does the media have in reporting on vaccines?
I think the media has to help the government be transparent, or the governments of the world be transparent with what's going on. They need to talk fairly about safety and about effectiveness. That's the first charge. The next thing to do is to help people understand, how do you get the vaccine? Simply, like, how do I afford it? Where is it available? Who do I talk to? How do I do this? And finally, the media is particularly, has a particularly large role in being careful about what information they share and don't share. So if the media is deciding to pick up and to try to create false balance by picking up an anti-vaccine meme, that's very unhelpful. We know what the science is, and the science is very clear. We don't need to have a false expert put up next to another expert and have those two have a conversation. We don't need that conversation anymore about vaccines. We know what the answer is. These are safe and effective vaccines.
Terrific. Noel, thank you for joining us today. We're very grateful. Back to you, Imran.
Thanks, Bud.
Thank you, Sarah and Noel, for your time. Okay, we're going to shift gears a bit now. I want to do a quick poll and understand how the BOF community is sleeping. Yes, that means how all of you are sleeping. So you can find the polling feature in the window next to your video player. And here's the question that we have for you today. How often has poor sleep troubled you during the pandemic? A, always. B, very often. C, sometimes. D, rarely. Or E, never. The data will show up as you enter your responses from all over the world, and it's starting to come through. I'm going to give you a few minutes. We've still got some results that are coming through. but it seems pretty clear that I'm not the only one who's had trouble sleeping over these past 9 months. 39%, now 38%, 39%, it keeps changing. I'm just going to give it a second because it keeps going up and down. But basically, more than 30% of you are saying your sleep has been disrupted or troubled very often. Almost 40% of you are saying sometimes your sleep has been troubled during a pandemic. If we take the sometimes and very often and kind of add them up, that's like 75% of you having trouble sleeping during the pandemic. And I have to say, I completely relate with that. It's been a really tough period. And so that's why I wanted to focus our next talk here at Voices 2020 on sleep. A few months into the pandemic, my friend Anand gifted me an Oura ring. And Oura equipped me with powerful data about my sleep that I've never had before. And now I find I'm more able to associate how I'm feeling in the morning when I get up with how I've slept the night before, because I have data that helps me understand it. But Oura isn't like a ring that's about fashion, really, and not yet at least. But that may be about to change. Oura seems to be making moves into the fashion wearable space, which is not a term that we've heard in a while. At least I haven't been hearing it. But Oura recently launched a gold version of its ring. So watch this space. But Oura's CEO, Harpreet Singh Rai, has overseen the company's growth through ups and downs, including long periods when he couldn't keep the Oura ring in stock. That's a good problem to have, however, as it turns out, because investors, including Forerunner Ventures, poured $28 million into Oura in the middle of March, just as the pandemic was beginning. And as demand began to spike due to all of the sleep-affected, data-obsessed people like me interested in figuring out their sleep. And a couple weeks ago, I sat down with Harpreet, the CEO of Oura, and the noted sleep scientist, Dr. Matthew Walker, professor of neuroscience and psychology at UC Berkeley. And he just recently joined Oura as chief scientific officer. Now, Matt is probably one of the most not the most respected academic in the world on sleep. And he used the Oura ring completely independently for 2 years before agreeing to get on board as chief scientific advisor. And if there's one key lesson to share from this talk that's coming up, it's that when trying to solve health issues, as we've just learned from Sarah's talk, it's all about the data, especially with something like sleep. We're all different. We all have our own rhythms, and focusing on the data has actually been the key to Oura's success. So here's the science of sleep with Dr. Matthew Walker and Harpreet Singh Rai. Well, hello, Matt Walker, Harpreet Rai. It's lovely to be in touch with both of you, connected virtually. And today we're here to talk about sleep. What I really wanted to start with is how you both got interested in the space of sleep to begin with. Maybe Matt, we could start with you. How did you become a sleep scientist?
Most sleep scientists are accidental sleep scientists. No one, when they were sort of 5 or 6 at school and they say, what would you like to be when you grow up? No one shoots their hand up and says, I'd love to be a sleep researcher, And so we all fall into it. And I did too. Back 20 years ago when I was doing my PhD, I was looking at brainwave patterns with people with early stage dementia, trying to see what type of dementia they had. And I was failing miserably. Then I realized one day I was measuring my patient's brainwave activity at the wrong time, which was when they were awake. And instead I should be measuring it when they were asleep. And it was in the electrical static of sleep at night that I could start to define what type of dementia that they were going to ultimately trajectory kind of move towards. That's when I started to just fall in love with this thing called sleep. I became utterly fascinated. It has been a 20-year-long love affair. And to me, it remains the most beguiling topic of all of science.
From my side, probably more through negative experiences. So I did study electrical engineering in college and mainly worked on, different types of sensors that interact with the human body, including the brain. But I ended up graduating university and actually going into investment banking. And so probably, the worst profession for sleep hygiene, if I had to guess. But really, I think it's only till later did I really realize that, just as the correlation Matthew was talking about, that time, at night when your brain resets and your body resets is actually, the critical thing for us to be the best version of ourselves. I think that's what really, honestly, just negative experience, unfortunately, eventually becoming a positive one, led me towards sleep.
Can you give us a little window in how you and your team have kind of developed this product? In the fashion industry, a few years ago, everybody was talking about wearables, and the conversation around wearables has just kind of petered out. And so when I discovered this product, I kind of had the same reaction as Matt, which is like, it's something I can actually integrate into my life without having to worry about it. It just, the data, it's like now the first thing I look at when I wake up in the morning, because I'm really, I guess, motivated by data like lots of people. So I want to see if I got a little crown. But can you give us a window into how you've developed the Ring and how it works?
Convenience and ease of use when it comes to consumers is everything. Looking at or wearing any of these devices, takes time and it takes energy. If you think about Facebook, how easy is it to start a Facebook account and add friends? They'll suggest friends to you. They make that ease of use and convenience, and that's why they have over 1 billion active users. And so I think when we looked at wearables, Kara Swisher has called them unwearables in the past as well. The battery life would be really poor. Charging mechanisms are sort of a pain in the butt. It might be big and bulky, bigger than a regular watch, or not as fashionable. So it doesn't, look good with your outfit. And so I think, that sweet spot of sort of accuracy and convenience is what we aimed for. On the accuracy side, pulse signal really on your finger, these are arteries, and they come into, the palm of your hand, and that, we all have different color skin, right? But our palms are roughly the same. And then, that allows for a uniform measuring better than traditional wrist-based wearables. And also just that pulse signal from the artery, because the skin is so thin, is so strong. So we always felt like that could give us an edge up in accuracy over the wrist-based devices. And I think, frankly, on top of all of that, the use case of sleep, I think luckily, timing-wise, or unluckily for sort of society, as we become more digitally connected, all of us are sleeping less on average. And, we're more distracted than ever before. And so I think if you look at, I always tell people an interesting chart to look at is Google Trends data. So if you just look at keyword searches for sleep versus running, you'll actually see the two flip in 2016. The more people start querying for sleep because they're having issues sleeping, and lo and behold, that's sort of like exactly when LTE and, more cellular connectivity increased. And so I think, more people unfortunately are having issues with sleep than ever before. We're getting less of it as a society, which Matthew obviously knows a lot about. And I think for us, it's actionable. It's something we do every day, and making a product that, is both accurate and convenient was sort of the cornerstone.
Matt, what is the data saying to you right now about how the pandemic has impacted the way people are sleeping?
Certainly some proportion of people for whom the sleep has become longer in duration. With the coronavirus and people not having to commute or sort of get their kids to school even earlier, it's sort of like revenge of the night owls, that the night owls can finally go to bed a little bit later and wake up a little bit later because they have more time. And that has led to some betterment in overall sleep health. However, that's one cloud of data that we've been seeing. There is another cloud of data where sleep has definitely become worse, quality and quantity. And I think for probably at least 3 reasons. The first is that some people, of course, have lost their jobs. Others are uncertain as to whether they will retain their job. And then finally, there's a lot of us who are just anxious about the whole scape of health when it comes to COVID. And it's that trigger of anxiety that we know is one of, if not the underlying principal mechanisms for this thing that we call insomnia.
I think one of the interesting things we noticed that was actually even more standout is just the level of activity. We've seen people, whether it's their commutes or, gyms being closed, that total activity has unfortunately definitely gone down. I think that's something that ends up then having a effect also on your quality and your level of sleep as well.
The other thing I read, Matt, in some of your writing is the impact of sleep on immunity. And of course, we're all thinking about immunity right now because there's this deadly virus still
circulating in the community. As I speak right now, much of the United States, most of Europe is, engulfed in a second wave. How does sleep, or the quality of our sleep, impact our immunity?
So there's actually a very intimate relationship between your sleep health and your immune health. And I'll just give you some examples. What we know is that individuals who report sleeping less than 7 hours a night are 3 times more likely to become infected by the rhinovirus, which is the common cold, relative to those who are getting more than 7 hours of sleep. We also know that women who are sleeping 5 hours or less a night are almost 70% more likely to go on to contract pneumonia, which is actually a critical part of the COVID-19 disease equation. But one of the other things that we've discovered is how sleep will enhance, or a lack of sleep will impair your ability to become immunized. So for example, if you are getting just 4 to 5 hours of sleep in the week before you get your flu shot, you produce less than 50% of the normal antibody response, rendering that flu vaccination, far less effective as a consequence. Now, if you flip that on its head and you ask, well, then what is it about sleep that's so wonderful? Firstly, we know that it's during sleep, particularly deep sleep, when you refresh all of the weaponry, all of the immune weaponry in your sort of health arsenal, as it were. And it's not just that you enhance immune factors when you are sleeping, but during sleep, the body becomes more sensitized to those circulating immune factors. So net, when you wake up the next morning, you are a more robust immune individual as a consequence. When it comes to COVID, we're going to have a vaccine. Of that, I am sure. There is hope out there, and I think we will have that. But then the question becomes, well, is the same thing true about your COVID vaccine? So next year, when we all go and get our COVID shot, do we need to be thinking about sleep? Will that determine the success or failure of whether you become immunized? How do we do that? Well, let's say that we have a sleep tracker and we have intelligent software that says, look, I noticed that you got not particularly great sleep this past week. And I know that you've got an appointment at the NHS or with your GP for your COVID flu shot. Let me just push that an additional 4 days. Let's work on your sleep. I'm going to coach you with an app towards better sleep. And then I've got 3 appointments in 10 days time. Which one would you like to select? And we can far more intelligently create a closed loop system where technology is helping our health and our immune system to combat disease states.
One of the things that we've seen on the finger, and also that we've just had in Oura Ring since day one, has been temperature sensors. And so, some of the work this year, we wanted to actually do even more research in sleep labs like Matt's, but just given lockdown, it's actually been pretty hard to do that, right? You're not recruiting subjects during a lockdown. I think one thing that we did as a company when the pandemic was happening was really double down on all the research we could do as a company, but specifically on COVID and other influenza-like illnesses. So we ended up actually being the first wearable to launch an IRB-backed study with a large academic institution, UCSF, particularly starting on COVID, and we ended up opening that up to our whole user base. And what we've seen is there's, early data suggests that signals from the Oura Ring, and other wearables are obviously doing this too now, can perhaps tell people they may be coming down with something, 1 day, 2 day, potentially up to 3 days in advance. Still a lot more data to collect and finalize. But I think, again, this technology, could really, as Matthew talked about, really help inform and innovate on our healthcare system, globally. And if that happens, I think ultimately we're going to have better lives, better health, right? And be happier people too.
Matt, one of the other benefits of sleep, COVID aside, is around productivity. And this has been a year of extreme stress for people. Can you talk about the relationship between sleep and productivity?
Sleep in some ways has an image problem. That we think of people who get sufficient sleep as being, slothful or lazy, perhaps. And the data are very clear when it comes to productivity. Less sleep does not equal more productivity. It was not true in the rote industrial era, and it's never been more true now in the digital era. And there's lots of great data on this. Firstly, we know that underslept employees will typically select fewer challenging problems if you give them options. So they will probably just lapse into checking voicemails or looking at email rather than digging into hard work. Secondly, of the problems that they do try to solve, they produce fewer creative solutions. And it's creativity and ingenuity that's supposed to drive our businesses forward. They're supposed to be the engines of innovation. Third, we also know that underslept employees, when they're working in groups, will typically slack off and ride the coattails of other people's hard work. It's called social loafing, and it doesn't breed good goodwill among teams. The fourth aspect is that underslept employees are typically more likely to lie and be more deviant, to falsify reports or sort of create anomalies in data that are not true. And finally, a lack of sleep goes all the way to the top of the business chain, because what we know is that the more or less sleep that a business leader has had from one night to the next, the more or less charismatic that employees will rate that business leader from one day to the next, even though they know nothing about how much the business leader slept. It's evidential in their behavior. And you can add up all of those things and then say, okay, let's take a 30,000 foot view on this, which is what the RAND Corporation did, which is an independent survey company. And what they found is that insufficient sleep and fatigue costs most nations about 2% of their GDP. So here in America, that was $411 billion lost to insufficient sleep. In the United Kingdom, it was over $50 billion. In Japan, it was over $130 billion. In other words, if we could solve the sleep loss crisis within most first world nations, I could almost double the budget for healthcare or even double the budget for education. So the way I think of sleep is not like a cost. I don't sit there at the end of the evening and thinking, okay, I've got this additional work to do. I've got this grant to write. I've got this paper to write. I don't think of it as going to bed at the right time being a cost. I change that. I actually see it as an investment in tomorrow. If I get to bed early tonight, it's the best investment for me to get that work done tomorrow, because you're just so much more efficient.
Okay, if sleep is my investment in tomorrow, how can I develop better sleep habits? Like, what are the kind of top tips for getting the best night of sleep possible?
One thing to kick it off is I do believe, and I think our users do too, and the adage that what gets measured gets mastered. And I think there's enough variety in people's lives that certain days are going to be more stressful. Certain days they will eat later because of a social gathering. Certain days you may feel really tired and probably drink too much coffee, which will even hurt you then the next day. And I think being able to look at that and understand which habits are really making a difference for you and which ones aren't is really valuable. In terms of sleep hacks, I'll just throw up my new favorite one has been the sauna. I have, been using the sauna regularly, have gotten into a very good pattern of it. And it's just something that has totally even improved my sleep as, CEO of this company, even to another level that I wasn't getting before.
This idea of sleep, what gets sort of measured, gets managed or gets mastered, is important because it's not really like the gym or eating. We're awake, and I can remember what I was doing at the gym. I was conscious and I was aware of it. I can remember what I've been eating during the day. But when you're asleep, it's a non-conscious process. So it's actually even more challenging for you just subjectively to know what's going on. And that's why I sort of like the idea of sleep tracking. Also, if I were to ask you, Imran, how did you sleep last night? You can tell me. But if I were to say, how did you sleep last Tuesday? Probably don't remember. But I can look at my data. And you can, you don't have to worry too much with these trackers, about last night. Everyone can have a bad night, and that's just fine. Follow trend lines rather than daily headlines. And it's this type of ongoing tracking and the trend lines that Harpreet was talking about, where you can look at what's happening in your life and what's sort of perturbing it. And, a sauna is a great example. In fact, in the science, we know there's something called the warm bath effect, where when you warm the body up and when you get out of the bath, It's not that you get into bed and you're all nice and toasty. It's the opposite, that you've come out of the bath, all of the blood is to the surface, and then you have this huge expelling of heat from the core of your body. Your core body temperature drops, and that's what needs to happen for you to fall asleep and stay asleep. And that's why the warm bath effect or the sauna effect helps with your sleep. It's the reason that you will always find it easier to fall asleep in a room that's too cold than too hot. Too cold, taking you in the right direction. Two other things I would note. One is regularity. And that's one of the other nice things about these devices, that they can send you notifications. You know, we typically have a wake up alarm. Why don't we have a to bed alarm? And it's always surprised me that we don't. But if a device that understands your sleep and your circadian rhythms can find the sweet spot of where you should be sleeping on the 24-hour clock face, it can give you nudges towards going to bed and not just waking up. So regularity, going to bed at the same time and waking up at the same time, is critical. And then the final thing I would say is, if you're struggling with sleep, in addition to avoiding naps during the day and also avoiding caffeine afternoon and alcohol in the evening, the last thing I would say is, don't stay in bed awake for too long. I would use the sort of 25-minute rule of thumb. If you've been trying to fall asleep, or you've woken up and you're trying to fall back asleep, and it's been 25 minutes, get up and get out of bed, because quickly your brain starts to learn this triggered association between every time I go into my bedroom, I'm wide awake, because I've learned that that's the place where I'm always awake rather than asleep. Go to a different room, just read a book in dim light, listen to a podcast, don't check email or any of that good stuff. Don't eat, because that will be a habituated trigger. And then only return to bed when you're sleepy. And there's no time limit. So the analogy there would be, you know, you'd never sit at a dinner table waiting to get hungry. So why would you lie in bed waiting to get sleepy? And the answer is that you shouldn't. Those are some good tips.
Well, thank you so much, Harpreet, Matt, for your time. I'm sure all of our community will benefit from that advice. And I love the what doesn't get measured doesn't get mastered or managed. We use that in business, of course, but it's equally applicable in life.
So true.
All right. Thanks, both of you.
Thank you, Imran.
Thank you very much. Thanks for having us. Take care.
For several years now here at Voices, we've learned about the benefits of meditation. It's a recurring topic because meditation has proven enduring benefits on mental health, alertness, and well-being, all things that we've been discussing today. But it turns out I don't need to tell that to you. You know, we were just looking at Sarah's data about responses, behavioral responses during the pandemic, and actually in our own BOF community exit poll, 56% of respondents reported to talking to someone about feeling stressed, which is much higher than with the data that we just saw from Sarah. And actually, 45% of you have practiced some form of meditation in the past 7 days. I'm pretty sure then that Deepak Chopra probably needs no introduction to the Voices crowd. You're probably already aware that he is one of the world's foremost thinkers in the space of whole health and well-being based on a twin understanding of science and spirituality. And for years, Deepak has had a close familial relationship with Carmen Busquets, herself a dedicated practitioner of meditation for more than 2 decades. I know this because, full disclosure, Carmen was an early investor in BOF. And besides business plans and projections, over the years, Carmen and I have frequently talked about our shared experiences with meditation. Recently, I met virtually with Deepak and Carmen to talk about meditation and how it can lead to a more awakened life. Deepak, Carmen, thank you so much for taking the time to join us for Voices this year. This is a highly unusual Voices with you, Deepak, in San Diego and you, Carmen, in the Bahamas. But luckily, technology has connected all of us today to have this very important conversation on meditation and how meditation can lead to an awakened life. But before we get into some of the science of meditation, Deepak, I just, you spend a lot of time, I've got your most recent book here with me, Total Meditation, and you talk a lot about the underlying causes of stress in daily life. Where do these Where do these things come from that create stress for us?
So thank you, first of all, Carmen, and thank you, Imran, for having me. Stress is usually defined as the perception of threat. So stress is not out there, stress is not in here, it's how in here deals with out there. So stress usually is blamed on threatening situations when in fact it's your response to those threatening situations, quote unquote, that actually creates biological havoc or biological chaos. Human beings have the capacity to respond at many levels to challenges. The most primitive way is what we call the fight-flight response. So in a threatening situation, we either fight or we run. The second most primitive way is what we call the ego response, where we try to manipulate a situation either by being nice or nasty or stubborn or playing the victim. 99% of humanity behaves like that, so 99% of humanity is stressed. And beyond these two responses, we have something called the restful alertness response, which is the meditation response. Beyond that, there's something called the intuitive response, which is to eavesdrop on context, meaning, relationship, and story. Beyond that is the creative response. And beyond that is the visionary response. And beyond that is something called the sacred response. So meditation takes us beyond the first two survival responses into intuition, vision, creativity, imagination, insight, and healing. That's why meditation is so important right now, because the world is stressed. There are 3 pandemics going on. One is the economic crisis, the second is COVID-19, and the third is stress. And that stress is aggravating both the other crises as well, because stress produces inflammation in the body, which is linked directly or indirectly to both acute and chronic illness. In fact, right now, the people who are getting acutely sick or getting what are called cytokine inflammatory storms, they're totally as a result of stress.
So as you said, Deepak, the past 8 months have been incredibly stressful for everybody. We all have our individual stresses, but this situation where everyone is confined to home, where people are worried about their own health, about the health of others, where people have financial worries, there's so many things adding on top of each other. What does it take for someone to thrive during a period like this? And what role can meditation play in helping us as humanity cope with all of this uncertainty? We don't know when things are going to end. We don't have the answers around what lies ahead. How do we thrive during a time when there's so much uncertainty?
That's a very good question. And if I was to look at the global landscape right now and come up with one word for what humanity is experiencing, it would be grief. Carmen is not a stranger to grief, nor is anyone here a stranger to grief. We've all had loss in our families. As a physician, I've noticed different stages of grief. So the first stage is denial. The second stage is victimization. Then there is anger, resentment, grievances, even hostility, sometimes guilt, shame, depression. All of that adds up to depletion of energy in the body and makes us even more susceptible. Sometimes, and very rarely, people go beyond the helplessness and frustration and the sadness of grief. They find acceptance. There's no choice. We have to find acceptance of what is at the moment. Once you find acceptance, then you find meaning. So in the last 7 months, I've been engaging not only in meditation, but meditation that includes reflective self-inquiry, which includes asking myself questions deep in meditation. Who am I? What do I want? What is my calling at this moment? What is my purpose? And what's my next step? Through gratitude. When you open your mind to gratitude, you feel healed already. You feel a lot of relief, and you can access what we call pure consciousness through meditation. So I think this is an opportunity for us to reinvent life totally. Reinvent the body, resurrect the soul, create a joyful, energetic body, loving, compassionate heart, clear mind, and lightness of being. If we only keep a few things in mind, and this is a moment of phase transition. The old way of doing business in the world is gone. So there's a death, but there's also a resurrection. And that resurrection is saying, let us all work together for a more peaceful, just, sustainable, healthier, and joyful world. And the technologies are there, including this technology where we are sharing our conversation with the world. But there are many other technologies that lead to emergence. Emergence happens when there's shared vision, where there is emotional and spiritual bonding, and where everyone complements each other's strengths. People in the fashion industry, scientists, philosophers, storytellers, entertainers, educational people all come together to find the creative solutions which are happening as we speak.
Yeah, well, it's funny, Deepak, that's a little bit about what Voices is all about, actually, is like bringing people together to learn from different disciplines, to kind of appreciate the different, what we can learn from our differences and what we can learn from people who are, have been trained differently, grown up in different cultures, all of that. Carmen, I know you and Deepak have a long familial relationship, and you also have a long relationship, both of you, with meditation. What personal reflections do you have on how meditation has helped you cope during this period of great stress and grief?
Because of COVID, a lot of my friends reach out to me to give meditation, and I talked to Deepak, and I told him, I'm going to, do you think I am capable of teach meditation? And he told me, remember, Deepak, at the beginning when I was in Switzerland, and I felt kind of uncomfortable, and you just told me, go with the flow. This is what people need. So for me, it has been a time where I have learned a lot about giving service. It's incredible. I have gone with the flow. I started doing 3 hours of meditation per day in English, French, and Spanish. I never thought that I could do that in French. And I think it's incredible what comes out from you. And what Deepak says is, I think life has prepared us, the meditation and the fact that we all have been meditating all along through our life. It has prepared us to accept this situation as something that we cannot control immediately. We knew right away this was a learning for the universe. So I had to let go. I don't know about you, Imran, because you also meditate.
For me, the meditation practice, I started with Vipassana meditation about 15 years ago. And I grew up in a culture where my grandfather used to meditate every morning, but it was never taught to me. And I think, that's the kind of next thing I wanted to talk to you both about, which is, I think still when people talk about meditation, it seems for some people to be this kind of new age, hocus pocus kind of thing, but there's actually a lot of science that underpins the benefits of meditation. And Deepak, in your recent book, you explain some of the science behind why meditation is so powerful and how it can take you through those stages that you walked us through earlier. Can you talk to us a little bit about, why, the science of meditation?
So you mentioned Vipassana, which is referred to as insight meditation, these days getting a lot of attention as mindfulness and mindful awareness. So that's one form of meditation. There are others like mantra meditation, and there are others, reflective self-inquiry, transcendence, etc. But they all have the same effect. They bring about self-regulation. So they move from your biological responses, from fight-flight to restful awareness and homeostasis, which is self-regulation. Inflammation comes down. The level of telomerase, which is the enzyme that controls biological age goes up. We have a study now with the Nobel laureate that showed that within a week, the level of telomerase went up by 40%. We also saw in the same,
Wow.
and we also saw in the same study that genes that activate healing went up, some 17% over baseline, and genes that cause are directly or indirectly responsible for inflammation and chronic illness like diabetes, autoimmune illness, even cancer, they went down in their activity. This is called the epigenetic response. All the hormones get self-regulated. This is on the biological level, but then on a personal, social level, meditation also increases your capacity for empathy, for compassion, for joy, for equanimity, for creativity. And then on the spiritual level, of course, it helps you get in touch with your innermost being, the core consciousness that we call self. So at every level, meditation is healing body, mind, and spirit.
I wanted to remind you, Deepa, the experiment that you did years ago. Remember about the people that were meditating in one room and the other people that were not meditating. And I think it's important that you talk about that study, because it's the first time I understood the importance of prayer and the importance of people meditating in Bhutan or in Tibet, the importance of collective meditation, the importance of what you're doing, with Oprah, and all these like big meditation groups. And that study helped me to understand that even if other people don't meditate, you have scientific tests that when you took the blood test of the people that they were not meditating, they still got the benefits out of it. So I would love you to talk about that.
See, one of the tenets of Eastern wisdom traditions is that consciousness is not just in the brain, that the brain is just the localization of consciousness, which is consistent with spiritual traditions, that spirit is one, and then, whatever term you want to use it, the Holy Ghost, Ein Sof, ultimate reality, Brahman, it doesn't matter. But consciousness is one, and then it differentiates into innumerable modes of knowing, minds and bodies and perceptions. So when you go into meditation mode in a group setting, because consciousness is a field that is not confined to the body, spreads and ripples across space and time, it affects other people as well. Your meditation and your prayer affects other people as well. And now there are many studies that are slowly emerging that shows that there is increased brainwave coherence, not only in individual meditators, but it's accelerated in group meditation. It also affects the brainwaves and makes them more coherent in those who are not meditating. So we could be a group of people meditating in a big setting, in an environment, and the stress levels of people who are driving taxi cabs outside, or bus drivers, or people out there on the street, they start to feel better, not knowing why they're feeling better.
It's amazing.
And you've proven that in a real experiment.
There were many experiments like that in the late 80s, and right now there are many more going on. Yes, many experiments that showed that group meditation in Washington, D.C. decreased traffic accidents, decreased crime rate, and everything was affected in the whole city just by a group of people meditating together in a hotel, unbeknownst to the people on the streets.
Still, there's all of this chaos happening. There's change and uncertainty that's rippling through the world, and the idea that we can kind of separate our own happiness or find our own happiness by just focusing on the things that we can control. I mean, how do you think through that, Deepak? That this idea of like finding happiness and focusing on the things that the choices, the lifestyle choices we make, as opposed to the things that we can't control.
So Imran, there are a lot of studies again on social intelligence, emotional intelligence, And social scientists today are identifying what they call the happiness formula. So here it is. Happiness formula is H is equal to S plus C plus V. H stands for happiness. S stands for set point in the brain. So set point in the brain, unhappy people see problems, happy people see opportunity given the same situation. That's set point. Set point is responsible for 50% of your daily happiness experience. And you can shift that just by asking that one question. Instead of asking, what is the problem, what is the challenge, and then asking the next question, what is the opportunity, and leaving it in meditation. That's S plus C. C is conditions of living, which is economic conditions of living. So that adds about 12% to your daily happiness experience. If you win the lottery, you will be very happy in the beginning, but after 6 months, it will plateau, and 1 year, you'll be back to your set point. The third part of the happiness formula, H is equal to S plus C plus V, is voluntary choices. And every day, we make two kinds of choices. One for personal pleasure, such as entertainment, alcohol, sex, food, etc., shopping. Those make us happy too, but only transiently for a day or two. The big things that make us happy are the choices that we call choices for fulfillment. That means we find meaning, purpose, opportunity. But here's the most important thing. The fastest way to be happy is to make another person happy. And you do that by attention, which means listening, affection, caring, appreciation, noticing their qualities, and acceptance, not trying to change them. That's the happiness formula, and we can exercise that right now.
There's a lot of people who might be watching and listening today who've thought about meditation, but for whom it's intimidating or, seems something that they feel like they won't know how to do. How can someone who has never meditated before get started on their meditation journey?
Well, they can start with simple breath awareness, body awareness, observing their reaction to react, putting the pause button before they react. But there are now a lot of online programs with Oprah's help. We've taught almost 10 million people online how to meditate. So one way to access meditation is go on the Chopra app, which is available. It's free of charge, and you're welcome to start your journey through the app.
Great. Carmen, do you have any advice for people who are just thinking about meditating for the first time? You've been meditating for a very long time. What advice do you have for someone who wants to get started?
A lot of people tell me, well, I don't have time. And I say, it's not about time. It's about just do 1 minute meditation sometimes. Just like give 60 seconds to yourself. And sometimes you just have and create that awareness and of having that 60 seconds of silence. Anybody can do it. You can enjoy your coffee and really say, okay, this is great, and tasting, and that experience, takes you out of your mind for 60 seconds. So it's like if you are in a meeting, from one meeting to another, you take 60 seconds in between those meetings, and that really 1 minute that you take becomes maybe 5 minutes one day, and then another day becomes 10 minutes. It's as useful as the 25 minutes that you're gonna take during the morning. And once you realize that you can arrive to 1 second of silence, it's incredible. Some people just say, oh my God, I managed to have 1 minute without thinking and just completely enjoying the coffee. And I think it doesn't take an excuse. It doesn't give an excuse to anybody. Anybody can do it. And I don't know if Deepa agree with me. I think it's a very useful tool to have for our hectic life that goes from one meeting to another.
I totally agree, Carmen. That's amazing what you just said. Even a minute makes a huge difference, and then you build up from there.
Maybe as a final exercise, we could do a little virtual meditation between the 3 different cities that we're in. And Deepak, would you consider just leading a very short, 60-second meditation?
Yes. So wherever you are right now, please sit comfortably. Keep your feet firmly planted on the ground. Uncross your legs. Keep your hands open and close your eyes and just observe your breath. Just observe your breath. You don't need to manipulate your breath, just observing it, and you'll see that it slows down. Now bring your awareness into your heart mentally, and mentally ask yourself the first question: who am I? Don't try to answer the question, just ask it. Allowing any sensations, any images, any feelings, any thoughts to spontaneously arise or not arise. Who am I? Then ask the question, what do I want? Once again, allow any sensation, image, feeling, or thought to spontaneously come to you. What do I want? Third question. What is my purpose? What is my calling in this moment? Allowing any sensations, images, feelings, thoughts to spontaneously come to you. Fourth and final question, what am I grateful for? Gratitude opens the door to abundance consciousness. Allowing any sensations, images, feelings, or thoughts to spontaneously come to you. And now just repeat your full name to yourself mentally. So I am Deepak Chopra, I am Imran Ahmed, I am Carmen Busquet. Just repeat your full name to yourself mentally. And now let go of your name and replace it with just a short phrase, I am. Just those two words, I am, I am, I am. No name, no story. And now if you want, replace I am with a mantra, aham, which is the vibration of existence. Aham, aham, aham. Mentally. This should be done for about 2 minutes or so, at least, or 1 minute, and then finally let go of the mantra and just rest in awareness. Just rest in being. This is our fundamental state of existence, just being. From being emerges feeling, thinking, speaking, and doing. But always go back to being. Rest in being. And when you're ready, slowly open your eyes.
Thank you. And thank you, Carmen, for your time and for connecting with us in this conversation. Deepak, it's a real honor to have had you join us for Voices this year. I hope that one day we'll have an opportunity to meet in person. And understand you need to run off to a session with His Holiness the Dalai Lama, so I don't want to keep you.
Thank you. Well, thank you, Carmen, for organizing this. Thank you, Voices. Thank you, Imran. God bless, Carmen. Give my love to your family.
And thank you.
It was so great to speak to Deepak and Carmen. And now it's time for our final talk of the day, the very last talk of Voices 2020. Tim Blanks first joined the BOF team as our editor-at-large back in August 2015. Happy anniversary, Tim. It's our 5th anniversary. And although I've told this story before, it's probably worth recounting again that I grew up watching Tim on television in Canada. He had a regular fashion news show called Fashion File, and I was seriously obsessed with it. It seeded my first interest in this thing we call the business of fashion. And now look, here we are together in another kind of fashion television show more suited to the year 2020. And what a year it's been. One of my absolute highlights of the pandemic was receiving a huge green show in a box from Loewe designer Jonathan Anderson. Inside was a cornucopia of curious things, including a roll of pink printed wallpaper that became a social media meme as invitees to the Loewe show turned the fashion invitation into a craft project, exactly as Jonathan had intended. The wallpaper was designed in collaboration with the rising British artist Anthea Hamilton, who was nominated for the Turner Prize in 2016. Anthea's interdisciplinary practice involves a wide source of material to create complex, performative installations. Her subject matter has included everything from Japanese kabuki theater, 1970s disco culture, and radical Italian design. And today, Jonathan and Anthea are here to talk to Tim about their creative collaborations and how such important creative dialogues can lead to a new consciousness. The floor is all yours, Tim.
Thank you, Imran. Well, welcome, Jonathan. Welcome, Anthea. It's great to have you here because in this ongoing love affair between fashion and art, I think you two are my favorite affairees. I'm curious to know from you when it started, because the show in a box that arrived in July, June.
Well,
No,
it was later.
It was much
later.
later.
Yeah, it was
yes.
for the Fashion Week.
I have lost all track of time. Was only the latest of a string of very, very interesting collaborations and gettings together. Yeah. So where did it all start? Anthea, when did you first encounter Jonathan?
Start our affair.
It was a while. We started the affair in, we're now all about affair, in Miami. At the Loewe Foundation, we do a show once a year in the Design District, and through the curator, Andrea Bonacina, and Anthea, we all came together and we did a show in the store. So we took everything out and we did a show in it. And that was the first kind of moment, I think.
Yeah, and that was really nice. That was just I think the invitation was very open. It was just like, here's some time to make a few works. Yeah, do what you want. And then I did. But there's always that kind of change in mood. Like if it's an institution that asks you to do something, you kind of know where you are with that. You know, this is kind of usual artistic practice. But when you ask me, there's always this extra dimension that comes with it that I find, I don't know, it's very...
Usually quite quick.
Yeah, usually quite quick. And that's good because I'm the slowest person ever.
Were you surprised to be approached by Jonathan?
Not so much. Maybe within my own art practice, I really like the idea. I'm interested in not just being an artist. I feel like the way I'm thinking is within a creative field or a cultural field. So in fact, it seems like a great idea to do something which kind of pushes an artwork or whatever the limit of an artwork can be further than that, and ask people to look at things in different ways.
Because in your work, one of the things I read about you was that you're very interested in taking everyday things and then changing the way people look at something which is quite familiar to them. So I was thinking in the Loewe box, when you open the box, there is a roll of wallpaper. Well, everybody knows what a roll of wallpaper is. But it's completely transformed, obviously, by what happens to it after you take it out of the box and do what you should do with it. But there are other things when you got the Duveen Commission from the Tate, and you worked with Jonathan and Loewe on that, and that was a very, very provocative, enormous, immersive thing, which points out to me a way that art and fashion can actually alchemize into an entirely different entity. Do you think that is what happened there?
I think so. I think I was also thinking about it as like a collage, like this massive collage of how to bring different elements together. So there were like modernist artworks, there was this performer that was in there, and I was really aware of how vulnerable someone can be just sitting in a museum every day whilst other people are like passing to go and get a piece of cake. And I thought, I just have to do something to kind of give them, I don't know, like a special experience, almost quite a motherly kind of act. And I thought, I just want them to look the very best that they could. And I thought that this idea of these kind of beautiful costumes could be almost like armor for these kind of quite vulnerable bodies. And it just made absolute sense for the nature of the project to ask you, Jonathan, if you would support that or kind of come into it.
Yeah, and it was amazing. It was a quick turnaround, and we had a whole team of designers trying to work out fabrications or all different, like how do we make a three-dimensional head with a helmet inside that a dancer or a performer could survive in for long enough. And it was a kind of, I don't know, when I look back in the history of like kind of costume design, or you look at kind of make with artists in history, I always think they sometimes become some of the most memorable. It's one of my greatest moments that I ever worked, even had like a tiny bit to work on, and I felt that it is something that will go down in history. And I think when you look back at, for example, when Ray Karakubu did Dance with the kind of Lumps and Bumps collection and things like that, they become kind of encapsulated because they're very generous. Performances are, I always think dance or movement or in a weird way, the art in the museum is very generous. You know, when you go to the Tate Britain, you can go for free, and it's something that you come away with more than you entered. You know what I mean? And I think that's what I think that project was the entire space was tiled, which was like even a huge undertaking. It took a while.
But you know, I think of you in your work as being very curatorial in your approach to things. And you actually, when you did the exhibition at the Hepworth Wakefield, Disobedient Bodies, you just mentioned bodies in relation to the Duveen Commission at the Tate. And you worked together, you had work in that show as well. And that was a real repositioning of fashion, recontextualizing of fashion.
Yeah, well, it was kind of a bit of a kind of daunting experience, that, because Anthea had a show on before our show, which was based around the Kettle's Yard collection, which was, I always remember there was a spiral staircase in it, which had like these amazing objects, like using other people's artwork and then curating around it. So, and then several months later, then we had to open Disobedient Bodies, which we had the leg pieces in it, the Hepworth have in their collection. And I think through doing that experience, I think that was the turning point in which, for me, I realized that when being a designer and working within art, you have to let go through giving more. You have to give more in the process, because you're kind of working with objects that don't belong to you, and objects that you can't talk for, ultimately. And sometimes as a designer, you kind of get scared that you're going to say something that is maybe not the intention of the artist. But by doing that process of curating, I actually think from that moment of doing that show till present day, I think it's influenced the way in which I approach both my own brand at JW Anderson and at Loewe, because I feel that it kind of stemmed this idea of how do you build cultural brands, and that as much as that we make beautiful things, that we can open up beautiful dialogues or introduce people to different things which have substance, and it's not just a kind of like a take situation. It's kind of like a meeting in the middle, you know. And I think everything that we have done, they seem to be these milestones that I look back on, like, you know, when the Loewe Foundation bought the table, the beautiful table that has the glass, and I remember it being installed in the store and seeing it for the first time, and I could block out the entire store, because that for me was that someone, when I was a teenager going into a store and I could experience that, I felt like when I go to your shows, I feel it's, you know, going back to that generosity that you give back, no matter if you have to buy something or not buy something. I don't think it really matters.
Well, I think interaction's really important to you in your shows and your installations, isn't it? So when you actually walk into the Loewe shop and you see the Vulcano table, and that's a completely new context for it. But how do you feel about seeing your work in a setting like that? Has it, if it's made Jonathan, if working with an artist like you has made Jonathan rethink fashion, has working with Jonathan made you rethink art?
What if yeah, who can? I think generally I'm always kind of checking in with myself what I think art can be, and I think working with you or working in other contexts, like working with people who are, I don't know, glassblowers, like who are in Switzerland, like I'm always trying to find ways to test the validity of what I'm doing. You know, like I don't take it for granted that being an artist is necessarily an important role for me to be doing. So if anything, these are just ideas, and then I have the opportunity to manifest them. So seeing this kind of table that's like been traveling the world and now lives in London for a while at least, it's quite, I don't know, there's something really, like the generosity of the act that I had when I was trying to make it, I see doubled up in it's just kind of being in a shop in a way, and not being kind of hallowed in a museum, that it does, even though people shouldn't, you know they're going to touch it, and you know that it's quite at risk in a way, and that's something I quite enjoy about it. There's like a invitation to failure or invitation to drama in there that I appreciate.
I mean, those big glistening red globules of glass that are like a lava flow in the middle of the store. I imagine children kind of picking them up, and I mean, does that ever happen? They look awfully kind of vulnerable.
I think when we were installing it was like probably the most trickiest thing. I think I remember the installation was a moment. But weirdly, I think it's one of those things that you kind of, it's mesmerizing, but you kind of don't, you want to touch it, but you know not to. I think it's one of these objects that kind of draws you in, and then it kind of pauses you when you go near it, because it's kind of an awe. It's sort of like, how does this actually balance on the table? I think is the biggest thing. I always think of like, will it stay?
But, you know, it's like walking in there, and that's a table, and that's an incredible revisit of what a table is. The box, the Loewe box. Whose idea was the wallpaper? Because that seemed like such a synthesis of, you know, of your two, of you saying that you want to take people out of their comfort zones.
Yeah.
And collaborating with Anthea is a way of doing that. That you get something. It's a show. It's a fashion. You're told it's a fashion show, and you believe that because a famous designer says, "This is my fashion show." It's in a box, and you open it, and you build a world, which is what fashion does anyway. But you literally build a room to do a show in. Whose idea was it to do wallpaper?
It kind of came from, I went to go and see a show that Anthea had done at Thomas Dane Gallery, in which you'd done different rooms. One had like fur walls, there was another room which was black and white, and then there was like dégradé.
Riche,
yeah.
Dégradé.
And I remember when we were working remotely at home, and I was working with Ben, who does the styling, and I was we were looking at Marcel Duchamp and how he had done his very famous museum in a box. And I was thinking to myself, well, you know, how do we make people call to action? And then I was like, our clothing is this, but we need a set for it. And then I was just like, I just automatically thought of Anthea, because you kind of use wallpaper or painting of walls and things a lot, especially when you did the Turner Prize, where you kind of painted the entire room in clouds and with a massive bum. And I just thought there was something about what I admire in Anthea's work is it can engage people no matter where you are from, no matter what age you are. There is something that it evokes curiosity, and I thought, you know, if I had been doing a show, I probably would have asked you to do the venue anyway. So I thought, how do we get people to create their own? I had this fantasy of people weirdly doing their bathrooms somehow.
And they did.
And they did.
People actually did. I mean, you love. I know surrealism has been important to you, and it was actually a perfectly surreal thing. You talk about Marcel Duchamp doing his exhibition as his museum show in a box. This was a very surreal object to get.
Well, I mean, it's like a pretty surreal time. in a way. And I think that format of like a piece of wallpaper as a manifestation of that, as somehow representative of what's been happening and like the pause that's been put on, or like other incidents, you know, like everything, the idea that you would ask me to somehow react within the space of a wallpaper, I don't know, that's kind of my kind of problem in a way. Like if you just been like, can you do it? I don't know if it would have made sense. It needed to have all the other limits and the parameters and everything happening to kind of then liberate that space to try and make something which could be joyful or could be fun or repetitive or, I don't know, manic or however.
Well, it's interesting you mention a pause, because people were making things or are making things. That one thing that's happened in the lockdown is that people are baking, people are making, people are gardening over the lockdowns. And I mean, it has changed people's attitude to craft. You know, craft stuff is sold out everywhere. And this was such a kind of distillation of that, I thought. We know how much you love craft, how important it is to you, how you have the Loewe Prize celebrating craft. And craft and your work is so much about making things. Do you feel that this is a very important thing going forward, that there's a sort of humanity in what you created together, or what you have created together over the years, that is a sort of signpost to a future, that your collaboration would you like your collaboration to inspire a whole new attitude to the things that you make?
Over to you first. You might be better at answering it.
No, I'm not sure. I'd say that working collaboratively I think is really important. Like, I think I'm only going to answer this very from like a personal level. It's also not within my practice or self to kind of declare what I think anybody else should do. But I think working together, and maybe if I try to think about what craft is, it's about spending time, right? That's investment in skill, and whether it's me kind of observing someone else doing that or kind of enjoying looking at these kind of craft objects. I was trying to think about what else could be craft, and I thought maybe like the stamina that we've all needed to kind of get through this year is also like a type of craft, or like being resilient is like another type of craft, because it's about, I don't know, trusting in holding oneself together some way. And I feel like how that might feed into the show in the box or the times that we've worked together. I see myself as maybe like a cog in that, or a part of it, rather than, I don't know. Yeah, maybe that. I'll leave it there.
That's interesting, because patience is a craft as well.
Yeah.
And I think that that's something that I think you've both been very good about educating people in the value of patience, I think, in your work and in your design.
You know, I think you can start to see, I think, through doing the show in the box, or actually just in generally going through this year, you start to realize, I think, you know, when you look at the idea of wallpapering, like, you know, my mother was wallpapering the kitchen, like, you know, she would never have done that. But I think a lot of people have kind of found, we were just listening to about meditation. I think in a weird way, making is a form of meditation. I think the idea of like, to clean. I actually think cleaning is an amazing kind of form of craft, because you can order things, or you repurpose what you are doing in your day and you build it into your day, that I am going to reset the table, or I'm going to clean the dishes myself. And I just think, you know, as we exit through this process, I think there's a lot of things that we have learned. And I think it's like, when you make something, it can reward you, because it kind of, you learn through the process of it. You learn the mistakes, you learn not to do that, or how to knit, or how to build a wooden box, or how to do the garden. And I think by doing that, we gain headspace. And I think fashion in the next while has got a lot of kind of thinking, I think, to do in terms of like, how do we gain headspace within product, and why do we want to buy it? I think it has to be more generous. I think it has to be more honest. And I think it has to be kind of like, you know, through collaborations, no matter if it's collaborations with artists or collaborations with tech or the factory floor, I think by us kind of looking at craft in a way where it can be a kind of rewarding meditation. Because I think downstairs I was like, someone was talking about meditation, I was like, I've never meditated, but maybe the idea of making when you switch off is a really good example of that. And I think when you look at younger people and you look at how people have tried to navigate through this process, which for everyone has been a nightmare, I think through the simple acts of doing or working or talking to someone on the phone, you end up collaborating more with each other because I think you kind of cut out the noise. So I don't know.
I mean, would you say that that's kind of what you feel about what you worked on together as well?
Yeah, there's something. How would you describe it? Like I had a different type of focus doing it, not just because it was fast, but yeah, there was like I found myself working at very odd times during the 24 hours on it in quite a different way, and that was. It didn't feel like dysfunctionality. Normally when you do things like this, you feel like, oh, I'm being, I don't know, overworking. It just seemed there was a recognition that things take their own time, and allowing that to happen, and putting like films on in the background or music, or I don't know, just letting, I don't know, one's own kind of sense of time take over was really nice.
Well, I like the idea of community as well, because I think that that's something that we've all become a lot more conscious about. And even like the Harry Styles cardigan, for example, you gave people the opportunity to make it for themselves with instructions. I mean, that became like a phenomenon.
But that's been probably the most craziest thing that never was planned. Like that's something, I think we're still counting, as over 20,000 people have made that globally.
I wanted to do something like that.
And it's sort of, it's fascinating, but from everywhere in the world, from Argentina to India I obviously help on the board at the V&A, and we've now worked out how to, Harry has very generously donated it. And what has been interesting in that is that it is kind of built communities online doing it together. You have like people like teaching each other how to knit, like something that people, even if you can transform, like for me, I get more out of something like that than working for 10 years. Like it's the accidents like this through this process that would never have happened if we had not have had a pandemic.
But when you release all of that energy, I mean, I find that so inspirational, that when you both look at what you've done together, are you thinking about ways to take it forward? Are you thinking about what you've created together is something new, and there's both of you approaching what you do with a different kind of consciousness, maybe. Can you see ways you would want to take it forward, still working together on things? Do you have plans?
I'm sure I'll pester Anthea sometime again. She'll probably not pick up the phone.
No.
With longer period of time.
Yeah.
No, definitely. I think we have to do something at some point.
I just actually we have time for one more quick question. I just want to know, because I felt that was an incredibly optimistic project to be working on. How are you feeling about your work, looking at the immediate future?
Good actually. I feel like, I've been through the ups and downs of everything, and I'm kind of ready. I feel like rested and kind of ready to, I've got a different sense of perspective, and I feel nervously excited to go forward. Yeah.
That's
cautious.
Good.
Yeah.
Jonathan?
Yeah, I'm looking. I think this year has been great, weirdly, because I think there's moments where you have despair, you have loneliness, you have excitement, you have creativity, and I think I've been able to cut out more time just to kind of do what I want to do in my own rhythm, and I think I'm looking forward to what comes out of it, because I think everything I do see that's happening, even being here right now, I would never have imagined doing. And I feel like every day is this like a new adventure, because there's no structure. There's no fashion week. There is not, a press tour or going to store openings. And I kind of enjoyed that process of what possibilities can happen in the abyss. Like what could it be? And it's fine not knowing.
nervous excitement. It's
Yep.
a new world. Thank you both very, very much.
Thank you very much,
And
Tim.
I'm really looking forward to the next box.
Thank you.
Thank you, Anthea. Thank you, Jonathan. Over to you, Imran.
Thank you, Tim, Jonathan, and Anthea. And now we have a little Post Voices surprise for all of you, and especially for one Jonathan Anderson. So, Jonathan, I want you to just look behind you.
Behind
There's
me.
a little thing behind the sofa.
Ooh.
Okay, just keep that with you there for a minute. Now, for COVID safety reasons, I'm not allowed to touch it. But now you can go ahead and take out what's inside. On a normal year,
So
Voices
embarrassing.
and the BFC's The Fashion Awards are held closely together at the end of the year in the UK. This year, the awards couldn't be held in person for obvious reasons. But earlier this week, I got this note from the British Fashion Council, and we just want to pan over to Jonathan here. I've been asked to share this live at Voices 2020. Jonathan Anderson is receiving a Fashion Award 2020 under the Creativity category. This year, Jonathan redefined the possibilities of what a show can be with COVID-19 restrictions by pioneering show in a box and show on the wall concepts for both J.W. Anderson and Loewe. He offered an invitation to become part of the show experience, as we just learned, delighting all of those who received it and many more who experienced it online. The collections were a defiant celebration of fashion and craft, impeccable quality and attention to details, pushing the boundaries of what could be created during lockdown. So Jonathan Anderson, congratulations
I'm embarrassed.
to you.
Wow.
A little celebration. Okay, come on. Woo!
Thank you very much. I feel very embarrassed right now. Well, I don't know. Thank you.
Do you want to give an acceptance speech?
I don't know if I meant to. Well, thank you very much to the British Fashion Awards for thinking of me, and to everyone in my teams, and Loewe at JW Anderson, and to LVMH for making it all happen. And I don't know. Thank you. I feel very embarrassed.
But you deserve it, Jonathan.
Oh,
and we're
thank
so
you.
delighted that we had this little
I
opportunity
mean, an explosion.
to celebrate your contribution to the end of this fashion year.
Okay.
Well, that brings us to the close of our proceedings this year, everyone. And I wanted once again to thank our partners at McKinsey & Company, SCAD, Affirm, and the Invisible Collection for their invaluable support in making Voices 2020 possible, so we can share all of these amazing speakers with you. I especially want to thank our very collaborative partners in bringing this unusual event to life, Jackshoot and Picnic Production, my partner, Nikhil Mansata, for designing this amazing set, and everyone on the crew involved in bringing this event together. They've all been incredibly accommodating and willing to go the extra mile to do the best we could do at making Voices 2020 a memorable experience in these most unusual times. But most of all, Voices represents the incredible teamwork of the BOF team. Every single one of our employees in London, New York, Los Angeles, Paris, and Shanghai plays a role in making this event happen. And after a year like this, it was really important to me to have something that could bring us together, to bring our team together, even through the biggest hurdles and obstacles that were thrown in our way, to enable us to reconnect with our core mission at BOF of furthering meaningful progress and change in the fashion industry. Plus, we always learn so much and we have so much fun because Voices is exciting. And as our head of organizations, Joan Cheng, said to me earlier this week, Voices is my happy place too. To the 12,000 BOF professionals around the world who signed up for this event, you are quite literally the beating heart of why we do what we do at BOF. The core purpose of BOF is to serve this community, all of you, and I really hope that we've done you proud. If you haven't managed to watch all of the talks as yet, that's completely understandable, as there's been a lot on offer these past few days, but I highly recommend you take the time to do so in the coming weeks. Our speakers this week have been outstanding. They've given so much of themselves in putting together such a compelling and passionate presentations. I feel so privileged that they've taken their time to share their expertise and perspectives and vulnerability with us. Please do take some time over the holidays to listen to what they have to say. All of the sessions will be available for on-demand viewing exclusively for BOF professional members. Please share your feedback with us in the survey we'll send out tomorrow so that we can improve upon this year's event. And finally, I want to leave you with one final note as we close Voices 2020. That is to explain why we do Voices each year. We do Voices at BOF because it helps us reconnect with our purpose as a team and as a company. And as we head into 2021, I want you to ask yourselves, what are you doing to manifest the soul and purpose of your businesses? Why did you originally choose to do what you do in the fashion industry? Because that is the eternal source of energy and inspiration that makes working in an industry like fashion so meaningful and so exciting. If you can connect with that purpose on a regular basis, I think you'll find you have the fuel to keep going in what are undoubtedly going to be some extremely tough months, maybe years ahead. And then, when the coronavirus is finally behind us, you'll be ready. You'll be ready for Carlota Perez's new green global age of the information revolution. That's all from London, and that's all from Voices 20. I bid you all adieu, and I look forward to seeing you all on the other side. Thank you, and good night.